Hi, welcome to DuffLaw Digital. My name is Brian Duffy and I'm a Florida lawyer. Today I'm with my associate Sydney Smith and we're going to give you 5 minutes Q&A on the probate process in Florida. If you want information on Florida probate, stay tuned. Hi, so today we're going to cover the topic of probate in Florida, and we're going to sort of go over kind of quickly on a high level the top 5 key points. We'll also have some videos later that will go into more detail on all these different topics. So keep watching or check out the YouTube channel and look for our postings on some of these things in more detail. But today we're doing the Q&A, which is kind of the high level, and we're going to talk about Florida probate. So let's get going. How's the start of the probate process? Why don't you give us that?
So the person who is petitioning to be the personal representative, sometimes called an executor in other states, will engage an attorney and will work with the attorney to determine if a probate is actually necessary. And generally speaking, assets that are held individually by the decedent will be required to go through probate. So that would not include assets held in a trust, assets held jointly with another person, or assets with a proper designated beneficiary.
Right. So if the decedent owned property in Florida, say their home, and it was in their name alone when they died, and there wasn't, some other method of directing where that property is going, it's either going to go by their will or, in a case of no will, under the intestacy statutes in Florida.
Correct.
So, okay. So the personal representative looks for a will.
Right.
Hopefully there is one. Contacts an attorney and goes over the initial process, and then the attorney and the client get together and they do the papers to file and open the probate.
Right. And if the judge is agreeable, he will grant the letters of administration, which is the document that allows the PR, personal representative, to act on behalf of the estate, to deal with financial institutions, to deal with creditors.
Right. So once you get the letters of administration, that's really the legal authority to act on behalf of the estate. Then you would get a EIN number. It's like a tax identification number for the estate. And then you would open up a checking account for the estate. You would transfer the brokerage accounts, if there's brokerage accounts, into an estate account with the tax ID number and do all those kinds of things, right?
Right.
So what's the next thing? So we've got the first sort of step out of the way. What's the second thing that we'd be looking at?
So the next thing, we've already talked about marshaling assets, but one thing to mention is that within 2 months of opening the estate, the PR and attorney will work together to file something called an estate inventory with the court. And that essentially lists the date of death values of all of the assets going through the estate.
Right, and Sydney used the term marshaling assets. That's just a term that we use. It essentially means taking control of the assets, identifying them. And in that case, we're always telling clients they have to be careful and they have to be conservative. So sometimes what happens is people say, my aunt sent me an email and said that the brokerage account was in joint names, so I don't have to worry about that. We would prefer that you get copies of the documents, actually copies of statements from the brokerage account or the bank, just to confirm so that we know for our file what was in joint name, what was in individual name, whether or not there was a designation of beneficiary, and all those kinds of things.
Right, and the sooner that you can get that information, once you have the letters of administration, the more efficient the whole probate process will be. So the next step after, this is all happening concurrently where we're marshaling the assets, but we also need to determine if there are any creditors in the estate. And Brian, maybe you can give a little rundown on what exactly needs to happen with creditors.
Sure. So creditors can be, anyone that the decedent owed money to at the time of their death. So some obvious examples are credit cards. If you have, if a decedent had credit cards at the time of death, they're going to have to pay the credit card company. There's a lot of details and specifics we'll go into in other programs and videos that we'll have on there, but we're talking generally speaking. So things like credit cards, the hospital, maybe there was a last visit to the hospital, maybe there was a nursing home. All those kinds of things are kind of ready and readily apparent. And then what we encourage our clients to do is once they have the letters of administration and they have the authority of the court to act over the estate, is to redirect the mail that the decedent was receiving to their home or to our office, and then you'll go through the mail and you'll look and see whether or not there's a statement or there's some kind of a reference to a loan or something else, and you'll identify creditors, which is an important part.
Okay, so speaking of creditors, once the estate is opened and the PR has the letters of administration, as you mentioned, they'll look through the mail. If you find any creditors that have not been paid, you should serve them directly with a notice to creditors. And in addition, the attorney for the estate will publish the notice to creditors in the local newspaper. And it's very important that we follow this process closely because it provides the statute of limitations under which the creditor can file a claim in the estate. So generally speaking, the creditor will have the later of 30 days from direct service of the notice or 3 months from the date of publication. If you don't serve all reasonably known creditors, those creditors could have up to 2 years from the decedent's date of death to file a claim. So it's really important that you identify creditors as soon as you can once the estate is opened.
Right. Now, once we've got the PR appointed and we've got the opening, phase of identifying the creditors and the assets and things like that, what's the next step?
So the next step is we need to make sure that all of the assets are properly secured and insured. So, for example, that would include if there's a home in the estate, make sure that the insurance policy continues after the decedent's death. Sometimes that is not the case. But you need to make sure that you obtain a policy or get some sort of a rider that does allow for the home to be insured. Also, high liability assets like cars and boats, those need to be insured as well. If possible, you should try to get those transferred out to the correct beneficiary as soon as the estate is opened in order to mitigate any liability to the estate.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just talking yesterday with a client, and in the estate, the decedent had a pretty large boat vessel, and he had a captain. Now, one of the things that we've seen in our practice in Florida, we have a lot of clients, and our clients range in net worth from a few $1,000,000 to several $100,000,000. So there's a big range there, and a lot depends on the level of assets in the estate. But in the higher wealth estates, what we see sometimes with these boats or yachts is there's a captain. A practice that's fairly common is to allow the captain to use the boat in between when the owner of the boat needs it. And that's something that may be okay for the owner to do while he's alive, but if you're the executor or the personal representative and you're in that situation, my recommendation would be no way. I mean, that boat doesn't go anywhere, because if there's any kind of an accident, it's going to create complications for the estate. What we want to do is secure the property. Don't give access and usage of these high liability assets to anyone while the estate is under administration. And as quickly as possible, like Sydney's saying, if we can, we'll get it out of the estate.
Yep,
right?
Yep, exactly. So we've gone through the process of noticing creditors, getting together the assets, getting valuations for them. What's the next step in the administration process?
Well, assuming everything is going along smoothly at that point, which may be a big assumption. And by the way, we're kind of curious. Leave us a comment below if you've been involved in any kind of a probate administration. Just put probate yes or probate no. In this way, it'll really help us, because we're really trying to find important information that we can share with you. And if our viewers let us know the level of interest or what their experience is, then we can sort of tailor our future videos to things that you'd be interested in. So leave us a comment. We're interested. And don't forget, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our future episodes on DuffLaw Digital. Mm-hmm. Okay, so assuming everything is going along smoothly in the estate and we've gotten to the point where we've done the marshaling of the assets, the next thing is we start to look at accountings. And from the beginning, we would coordinate, like Sydney said, a lot of these things are going on at the same time, but we coordinate with the CPA for the estate. And if there's going to be a need for accountings, we'd make sure some accountings were in place. There's a requirement under Florida law to either provide an accounting or have the beneficiaries waive an accounting. That's so the beneficiaries can see what assets came into the estate, what was paid out during the administration of the estate, what was distributed to the beneficiaries, and what was left over at the end. So that's the accounting. And, I think that's all we need to cover on that. Is there anything else you have to add?
No, other than just that if you do think that an accounting will be necessary, one thing that we suggest to our clients, and it's more economical to do it this way, is to engage a bookkeeper at the outset of the administration if you think that it's going to be necessary. The bookkeeper can do the reconciliations and hand that off to the accountant, who can prepare the formal accounting, which needs to be in the format, a special format under Florida law.
Right. And we always suggest that you should be conservative. So if there's any question at all as to whether or not all the beneficiaries are going to waive accounting, prepare the accounting.
Right.
If you're absolutely certain, maybe even from the very beginning, the beneficiaries indicate and sign waivers of accounting, then you don't have to go through that trouble or expense, and everything depends on, the factual circumstances of your situation. But once we get the accounting done, then we're ready.
Well, we need to make sure that all of the taxes are paid, and like Brian said from the outset, we'll be working with the accountant. A couple of the common tax returns that will be necessary is the decedent's final income tax return. If the estate has generated income, it may be necessary to file an estate income tax return. And then if the estate reaches a certain threshold of assets, it may be necessary to file an estate tax return. Once all of those returns have been filed, we can go ahead and work with the PR to prepare the closing documents and make distributions to the beneficiaries. We'll submit those documents to the court, and the court will, if agreeable, go ahead and discharge the PR.
Right. And one point on the estate tax return, right now we have a very high exemption amount for the estate tax. So I know that some of our viewers out there are in a situation where they're not susceptible, or they're not concerned with the estate tax because their estate is under the current exemption amount. But there are many of our clients that still are dealing with the estate tax, wealthy families above $11, $12 million, some of them in the $20, $30, or $100 million range. So we're going to have videos just on estate planning. We'll talk about complicated estates and simple estates, so you can find whatever applies to you and your family and get information on that. Mm-hmm. We'll do that in upcoming videos. So be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notification on those. So that pretty much wraps up the probate process, right? Once the PR is discharged, they have no further liability.
That's correct.
With respect to the assets of the administration. Everything is distributed out to all the beneficiaries, mm-hmm. and everything is done. So one thing we do want to talk about, which we'll do in another video, is litigation. Because in some cases, there's litigation, or there's a possibility of litigation in a probate estate, and that really requires a very unique set of circumstances on how to deal with.
Agreed. Yeah. It doesn't always go as smoothly as what we presented in the 5-minute video. So.
Right. Yeah, which I think we're over 5 minutes anyway. But
yes, we are.
That's okay. All right. So that's it on probate basics, probate administration in Florida. We really appreciate you watching. If you liked what you saw, please be sure to leave us a thumbs up. Leave us some comments below. Let us know what you'd like to see. If you have any questions, if there's something that you'd like us to cover. Remember, we're basically doing client conversations, which provides more detailed level information. We'll do one on probate soon. This is under the category of what we call the Q&A, which is just a quick sort of overview, the highlights of a legal topic. And if you find something in the highlights that sparks your interest, you can then go down into the client conversation section and get a more detailed video. And then we're also doing something called Hot Topics in the News, or Lawyers in the News, where we'll cover subjects like what does the Mueller report really mean, or is it really against the law to fake your child's college application, which I think it is, right?
Yes.
And some other things about attorneys in the news in media, TV, and movies. So please stay tuned. Be sure to subscribe. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. We'll hit the highlights and we'll see what... Yeah, I forget.
Do like the fun.
Hi, my name is Brian Duffy and I'm a Florida lawyer. I already said that.